Hello, Rashmee. Welcome to Strategic News International. It's a pleasure having you with us. And Rashmee is a London-based journalist. She's a columnist on international affairs and has reported extensively out of London. And she's going to talk to us today about the arrest of Julian Assange, the founder of Wikileaks, who was arrested this morning in London. So, Rashmi, a lot of excitement in London this morning for journalists following the arrest of Assange.
Indeed, excitement in London, and as the United States woke up, excitement across the Atlantic as well, because Julian Assange was arrested around sometime middle of the morning out of the Ecuadorian embassy here in London, not just for skipping British bail in 2012, but also on the request of the American government, because he faces a charge under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act of the United States. And this is basically to do with encouraging a former US intelligence analyst at that time called Bradley Manning, now called Chelsea Manning, to hack US Defense Department computers and accounts and steal documents, and that is basically the charge that he was arrested on. That is the reason he's basically been arrested.
Okay. Now, Assange was in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for as long as 7 years. They had granted him political asylum, and he seemed to, be there for good until some things have gone horribly wrong for him. Now, what exactly has happened? What has prompted this move by the Ecuadorians? And they sound very angry.
Well, I think you're very right to say that the Ecuadorians sound very angry. There have been reports from South America just a short while ago. There have been reports coming in that the Ecuadorian Minister of the Interior and the Ecuadorian Foreign Minister gave a press conference today and said that Julian Assange's behavior in the Ecuadorian embassy over the past 7 years has been very, very poor. It has been bad. And that, in fact, the Interior Minister even said that he had smeared feces on the walls of the embassy. And the Foreign Minister said that, well, actually, he has also been stripped of the recently granted Ecuadorian citizenship because of his behavior and his attempt to interfere with other countries' foreign affairs. Now, the actual issue has to be seen in the following way. The asylum that was granted to Julian Assange when he walked into the Ecuadorian embassy in London in 2012 was always a political issue. At the time, the Ecuadorian president, Rafael Correa, was one of a clutch of anti-American leaders, along with Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro and Bolivia's Evo Morales, who wanted to thumb their noses at the United States. And President Correa, he was happy to grant asylum to Julian Assange, along with a number of other measures that he had taken that was causing a lot of friction with the United States, including, doing deals with Iran, going against US sanctions and doing deals with Iran, taking money from Chinese investment, and a number of things that the Americans weren't very pleased about. So this was just one further thing, and former President Correa's administration appears to have protected Julian Assange very carefully and advanced his cause. So he was, as you said, it did seem that he would be there for as long as he chose to be there.
Yes.
Things changed with the election of President Lenin Moreno, who was actually President Correa's vice president. And he was very keen to return the relationship with the United States to a more friendly footing. And bear in mind, of course, that trade ties had suffered between Ecuador and the United States during the years that Julian Assange spent in the Ecuadorian embassy. And I'm not saying that that was the only reason, but it is significant that there was friction. And President Moreno has wanted to engage more with the United States, to appear more moderate than the hard left President Correa. And I think we got a sign last year when Donald Trump's vice president, Mike Pence, went to visit Ecuador and said that the relationship is getting back to where it used to be. So I think we could already see that there was this saga was going to wind down. But I'll just take you forward a little bit to today, the day of Julian Assange's arrest here in London. And Alan Duncan, who is a Minister of State in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, he actually made a remarkable statement. He said that he thought Julian Assange was a malign influence, but it was for his own health and well-being, that it was important to remove him from the embassy. It is not healthy to spend nearly 7 years in 1 or 2 rooms, according to Mr. Duncan, but I think it was really just about 1 room. That said, on a lighter note...
Was he serious about his remarks, or was it the typical British sense of humor?
Oh, no, I think he was dead serious. He said that he was, that anyone would be concerned about the health, the mental and physical health of anyone who was living such a confined life. Now, and actually on a lighter note, though, it does present some really terrible possibilities. It creates dreadful word pictures. There have been reports that actually not reports, I mean, I think it is pretty clear that the Ecuadorian government had last year asked Julian Assange to kind of clean up his act, literally, in the sense of taking care of the hygiene of the bathroom to which he was assigned,
Really?
cleaning up after the cat that he had. It sort of presents a dreadful picture of, a slovenly, very unhygienic environment in which this individual is incarcerated, self-exiled.
Sorry for interrupting you, but what does a man do when he's confined to, a very small area for such a long period as 7 years?
Well, I think as the UK Minister of State at the Foreign Commonwealth Office, Alan Duncan, said, he was not confined. He chose to stay there on his own. He refused to emerge. He refused to face justice, specifically British justice for, skipping bail, and then American justice for apparently engaging in theft from a computer.
What has, from the reactions I've seen so far, now the UK government also seems very pleased that he's finally out and under arrest. I think Jeremy Hunt has already commented on it, and they are extremely happy that he's perhaps going to leave the country soon. There are reports that the US has already put in a request for extraditing Assange to their country.
Yes, exactly. And as I was saying, Jeremy Hunt's deputy, Alan Duncan, in fact, admitted that he would be rather pleased to see the back of Julian Assange. When the day he leaves the soil will be a glad day for Britain, is what he indicated. Yes, in the United States, there has been the charges have been filed, and a request for Julian Assange to be extradited has been put in. The U.S. Justice Department has said that he would, if convicted, face 5 years in prison. And so it goes. I do have to say that it was really quite a strange sight that Julian Assange presented this morning when he was removed physically, bodily from the Ecuadorian embassy here in London, kicking and screaming literally.
We saw videos of that, yes.
Yes, and demanding that the British should resist. That was his word, the word that he continued to repeat, resist. And he looked like a very different person from what we have
Was
seen
pretty
him
frail,
before.
didn't he?
Well,
And has aged quite a bit.
aged quite a bit, definitely, but I think what did strike one chiefly was how different he seemed from when we had last seen him. I think it was in 2017 when he appeared on the balcony of the Ecuadorian embassy, and he seemed quite his usual self, slightly supercilious, slightly aloof, um, really, you know, master of all his surveys and offering homilies and advice to the world on how to address problems to do with state control and all of that. That said, even though today he was not as well groomed, he had a large quantity of rather white hair and a very scraggly beard, white beard. His tendency to he still seems to be given to histrionic gestures. He was reading, he was clutching a book titled Gore Vidal, History of the National Security State, or some such title. And he was seen reading that book when he was in the dock of the Westminster Magistrates Court. And that is not actually a book written by Gore Vidal, but was actually a collection of interviews with Vidal. So Mr. Assange's taste for the histrionic, the grand gesture, seems to have survived this removal from the Ecuadorian embassy, the rather abrupt removal.
Yeah. Another whistleblower, Edward Snowden, has also, expressed concern about the arrest of Assange. And of course, Bradley Manning is again behind bars after serving, I think, about 5 years, 5 year sentence after he was convicted. So, what really does this mean for the world of whistleblowers who bring to light a lot of say scandals or corruption or the misdoings of governments?
Well, I don't know. I think that the verdict of history is yet to be delivered on the work of Julian Assange. I think it's fair to say, without wanting to, prejudge what is going to happen to him or how history will regard him, I think it's fair to say that there is no real clear proof that Julian Assange was guided always in his actions by a quest for greater transparency, which would work towards greater social justice and the greater common weal. No one can say that. In fact, it is quite extraordinary the extent to which his influence is considered, as Alan Duncan, the British minister, said, malign. It's considered malign, actually, rather than possibly as a blow for free speech or free expression. And in actual fact, one thing I will point out is that though a number of journalists have been saying in various parts of the world, not least the United States, and from Brazil, Glenn Greenwald, who used to formerly work with The Guardian, and he worked alongside Edward Snowden, and was part of that whole saga. He said as well that it was a sad day for press freedom, but in actual fact, I think we should also consider the comments of Susan Hennessy, who is the executive editor of Lawfare blog in the United States, and she has pointed out quite correctly that with Julian Assange being charged by the United States only under the Computer Fraud Abuse Act, rather than for publishing the stolen documents, this does not have implications, she says, for journalistic freedom. Now, you can take that as you find it. Certainly, it is something worth thinking about. It could be just, nitpicking, or, the United States being taking a clever path out of this, but that's another point to consider.
On that note, Rashmi, we end this conversation. It was a pleasure having you on SNI. Thank you so much.
Thank you.